The Enneagram. In accordance with the law of octaves, every process on every plane is determined entirely by the law of the structure of the seven-tone scale. In this connection, every note in the scale, if taken on another plane, represents again a whole octave. The intervals between mi and fa and between si and do, which require an external shock for the process to continue, by this very fact connect one process with other processes. From this it follows that the law of octaves connects all processes of the universe to one another. For those who know the scales of the passage and the laws that govern the structure of the octave, it can allow an exact cognition of everything, every phenomenon, both in its essential nature and in its relation to other phenomena. For a synthesis of all knowledge connected with the law of the structure of the octave, there is a certain symbol that takes the form of a circle divided into 9 parts, with lines connecting the 9 points on its circumference in a specific order. Before moving on to study the symbol itself, it is important to understand certain aspects of the teaching that employs this symbol, as well as how this teaching relates to other systems that employ symbolism to transmit knowledge. In order to understand the interrelation of these various teachings, we have always to remember that the ways leading to the cognition of unity approach it like the radii of a circle moving towards the center. The closer they come to the center, the closer they are to one another. As a result of this, the theoretical statements that form the basis of one line can sometimes be explained from the perspective of statements of another line, and vice versa. It is therefore sometimes possible to form intermediate lines between 2 adjacent lines. However, without complete knowledge and understanding of the fundamental lines, such intermediate ways can lead to lines becoming mixed, that is, to confusion and error. Of the principal lines, more or less known, 4 can be named. 1. The Hebraic, 2. The Egyptian, 3. The Persian, 4. The Hindu. Of the last line, we know only its philosophy, and of the first 3 parts of their theory. In addition to these, there are 2 lines known in Europe, namely Theosophy and so-called Western Occultism, which have come from a mixture of the fundamental lines. There are grains of truth to be found in both these lines, but since neither embodies complete knowledge, any attempt to realize them in practical terms yields only negative results. The teaching of the 4th way is entirely self-sufficient and independent of the other lines, and has been completely unknown until the present day. Like other lines, it employs the symbolic method, and one of its principal symbols is the above-mentioned figure in the following form. This circle is divided into 9 equal parts. It has 6 points that are connected by a figure, which is symmetrical in relation to a diameter passing through the highest point of the divisions of circumference. The point is the apex of an equilateral triangle, linking together the 3 points of the divisions that do not enter into the construction of the original complex figure. This symbol cannot be found anywhere in the study of occultism, whether in books or by word of mouth. The people who knew about it considered it so important that they felt it had to be kept secret. The symbol shown above expresses the law of 7 in its union with the law of 3. There are 7 notes in the octave, the 8th being a repetition of the first. Together with the 2 additional shocks that fill the intervals mi, fa, and si, do, there are 9 elements. A complete version of this symbol, which connects it with a complete representation of the law of octaves, would be more complex than this one, but this version already shows the inner laws of a single octave, and provides us with a method for cognizing the essential nature of any one thing examined in itself. Any single thing or phenomenon, when examined in isolation, can be represented as a closed circle, that is, an uninterrupted process that eternally repeats itself. The circle symbolizes this process, and the separate points in the division of the circumference symbolize the steps of the process. The symbol as a whole represents Do, that is, something with an orderly and complete existence. It is a circle, a complete circle. It is the zero of our decimal system, which is written as a closed cycle. The symbol contains within itself everything necessary for its own existence. It is isolated from its surroundings. The succession of stages in the process must be connected with the remaining numbers from 1 to 9. The ninth step fills the interval, see Do, and completes the cycle. That is, it closes the circle, which then begins anew at this point. The apex of the triangle closes the duality of its base, making possible its manifestation in the most diverse triangles, just as it multiplies itself infinitely in the line of its base. Every beginning and every end of the cycle is thus situated at the apex of the triangle, at the point where the beginning and the end merge, where the circle is closed, and which sounds as the two Do's and the octave in the endlessly flowing cycle. But it is the ninth step that completes one cycle and begins another. This is why the number 9 occupies the highest point of the triangle, corresponding to Do, with the other numbers 1 through 8 occupying the remaining points. Moving on to the complex figure inside the circle, we should understand the principles of its construction. The laws of unity are reflected in all phenomena, and provide the basis for the numerical decimal system. If we consider a unit as a single note containing a whole octave within itself, then we should divide this unit into 7 unequal parts, in order to arrive at the 7 notes of this octave. But the graphic representation does not take into account the inequality of the parts, and the construction of the diagram takes first 1/7 of the whole, then 2/7, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7/7. These divisions can be represented as decimals. 1/7 equals 0.142857, 2/7 would be 0.285714, 3/7 being 0.428571, 4/7 being 0.571428, 5/7 being 0.714285, 6/7 being 0.857142, and 7/7 being 0.999999. In examining this list of periodic decimal fractions, we see at once that, in all except the last case, the series after the decimal point consists of exactly the same 6 digits, running in a definite sequence. Therefore, if we know the first digit of a given series, we can reconstruct the whole period in full. If we now place all the numbers from 1 to 9 on the circumference, and connect those in the period by straight lines according to their order in the period, then, regardless of which such number we start from, we shall obtain the figure found inside the circle. The numbers 3, 6, and 9 are not included in the period, but form a separate triangle, the free trinity of the symbol. Making use of the theosophical addition, and taking the sum of the numbers of the period, we obtain 9, that is, the whole octave. Again, each separate note also includes another whole octave that is subject to the same laws as the first. The arrangement of the notes will correspond to the numbers of the period, and the drawing of an octave will be as follows. The triangle 936, which unites the 3 points on the circumference that are not included in the period, connects together the law of 7 and the law of 3. 2 of the numbers not included in the period, namely 3 and 6, correspond to the 2 intervals in the octave, while the third is, so to speak, superfluous, although it does not place the fundamental note that is not in the period. Moreover, any phenomenon capable of acting reciprocally with a phenomenon of the same kind sounds as the note of Do in a corresponding octave. Thus, Do can emerge from its own circle and enter into correlation with another circle, thereby fulfilling the role in another cycle that is played by the shocks, filling in the intervals in its own octave. It is thanks to this potential that Do is connected through the triangle 3, 6, 9 with those places in the octave where the shocks from outside occur, where the octave can be penetrated and connected with what exists outside it. The law of 3 stands out in relief, so to speak, from the law of 7. The triangle penetrates, shines through the period. These two figures, in combination, represent the inner structure of the octave and its notes. At this point, it would be entirely reasonable to ask why the interval designated by the number 3 is where it should be between the notes mi and fa, while the one designated by the number 6 is located between sol and la, when it should be between si and do. The placement of the interval, apparently in its wrong place, itself shows to those able to read the symbol the kind of shock that is required for the passage of si to do. In order to understand this, we have to recollect what was said about the role of shocks in the processes that take place in man and in the universe. When we discussed the law of octaves as applied to the cosmos, we saw that in the cosmic octave, the absolute to the moon, the absolute of do to si, the filling of the interval is accomplished by the will of the absolute. The passage from fa to mi occurs mechanically, with the help of a special machine that makes it possible for fa, which enters it, to acquire, through a series of inner processes, the characteristics of sol standing above it, without changing its note. It thus accumulates, as it were, the internal energy for passing independently into mi, the next note. Exactly the same relationship can be found in every completed process. For example, the very same intervals and shocks can be found in the processes by which the human organism takes in and transforms nutritive substances. As mentioned in Chapter 2, man takes in 3 kinds of food. Each one of them is the beginning of a new octave. The second, that is, the air octave, joins up with the first, that is, the octave of food and drink, at the point where the first octave comes to a stop, at the note mi, and the third octave joins up with the second, at the point where the second octave comes to a stop, at the note mi. This allows development to continue. However, just as in many chemical processes, only definite quantities of substances, precisely determined by nature, yield compounds of the required quality, so in the human organism, the 3 kinds of food must be mixed in specific proportions. The final substance in the process of the food octave is represented as reaching the level C, which needs an additional shock in order to pass into a new do. But as 3 octaves have participated in the production of this substance, their influence determines the quality of the final result. It is thus possible to control the quality and quantity by regulating the 3 kinds of food received by the organism. The required result can be obtained only when the 3 kinds of food have been brought into a state of harmonious conformity by strengthening or weakening the different parts of the process. But it is essential to remember that no attempts to regulate food or breathing can lead to the desired result unless we know exactly what we are doing, why we are doing it, and what kind of result it will give. And furthermore, even if we were to succeed in regulating 2 components of the process, that is, our food and breathing, this would not be enough, because the most important thing is to regulate the food of impressions, which enter the upper story of our machine as discussed below. Therefore, before even thinking about practically influencing the inner processes, we must have a precise understanding of the specific relationship between the substances entering the organism, the nature of the possible shocks, and the laws that govern the transition of notes. These laws are everywhere the same. In studying man, we study the cosmos. In studying the cosmos, we study man. The cosmic octave, absolute to moon, can, according to the law of 3, be broken into 3 subordinate octaves. It is in these 3 octaves that the cosmos is like man, the same 3 stories, the same 3 shocks, where the interval fa to mi appears. These points are marked on the diagram representing devices that are found there in the same way as in the human body. The process of the transition from fa to mi can be represented schematically as in the diagram. The cosmic fa enters the machine like the food of the lower story and begins its cycle of changes. Therefore, in the beginning, it sounds in the machine as do. The substance soul of the cosmic octave enters the middle story like the air in breathing, which in turn helps the note fa inside the machine to pass into the note mi. This soul, on entering the machine, also sounds as do. The master that has been obtained is now joined by the substance of the cosmic la, which enters the upper story also as do. As we see from this, the notes la, sol, fa serve as food for the machine. According to the law of three, the notes in the order of succession will be la as the active element, sol the neutralizing, and fa the passive. When the active relates with the passive with the help of the neutralizing principle, it produces a specific result that can be symbolically represented as in the diagram of the triangle. This symbol indicates that the substance fa, in being mixed with the substance la, yields as a result the substance soul. As this process proceeds in the octave, developing, as it were, inside the note fa, it is thus possible to say that fa acquires the properties of soul without changing its pitch. Everything that has been said about the octaves of radiation and the food octaves in the human organism is directly related to the symbol of a circle divided into 9 parts. As the expression of a perfect synthesis, this symbol contains within itself all of the elements of the laws it represents, and everything relating to these octaves, and many other things, can be extracted from it and with its help transmitted. Each completed whole, each cosmos, each organism, each plant is an enneagram, but not every one has an inner triangle. The inner triangle represents the presence of higher elements, according to the scale of materiality in a given organism. This inner triangle is possessed by plants, such as, for example, hemp, poppy, hops, tea, coffee, and tobacco, that play a specific role in human life. The study of these plants can teach us many things about the Enneagram. It should be understood that, generally speaking, the Enneagram is a universal symbol. All knowledge can be included in it, and with its help can be interpreted. This is why we can only claim to know, that is, to understand, what we are able to put into the Enneagram. Whatever we cannot put into the Enneagram, we do not truly understand. A person who is able to make use of the Enneagram has absolutely no need for books and libraries. Everything can be included and read in the Enneagram. A person may be all alone in the desert and still trace the Enneagram in the sand and read in it the eternal laws of the universe. Every time he can learn something new, something he did not know before. If two people from different schools meet, they can draw the Enneagram, and with its help, they will be able instantly to determine who knows more and who is on which step, that is, who is the teacher and who is the pupil. The Enneagram is the fundamental hieroglyph of a universal language that has as many different meanings as there are levels of man. The Enneagram is perpetuum mobile, the perpetual motion that people have sought in vain since earliest antiquity. The reason is obvious why they could not find it. They looked outside themselves for that which was within them. They tried to construct perpetual motion as a machine is constructed, whereas real perpetual motion is actually part of another perpetual motion and cannot be created apart from it. The Enneagram is thus a schematic of perpetual motion, that is, of a machine of eternal movement. But of course, it can only be read by those who know how to read it. The understanding of this symbol and the ability to make use of it can give a person tremendous power. It is at once perpetual motion as well as the philosopher's stone of the alchemists. The knowledge of the Enneagram has been preserved in secret for a very long time. It is now available to all, but only in an incomplete, theoretical form that no one can make use of without instruction from a person who knows. In order to understand the Enneagram, it must be thought of as being in motion, as moving. A motionless Enneagram is a dead symbol. The living symbol is in motion, like everything in life. A motion does not follow a straight line, but simultaneously a twofold direction, circling around itself and falling toward the nearest center of gravity. This law of falling, which is usually called the law of motion, is one of the universal laws known in very ancient times. As cautioned in the introduction, one should take nothing literally. A large idea should be taken only with a large understanding.